So in the last couple of weeks, I've brought up a few videos regarding the current mod limitations and how modders have been cleverly chipping away at those unnecessary restrictions CA still has. One of the ones I brought up was that the start position file was essentially being used as a catch-all for everything else, which meant huge issues, but chief among them, you couldn't do victory conditions for any new modded factions. It's only been 2 weeks, but already a modder has figured out how to bypass a restriction that CA themselves haven't figured out how to do.
Wow.
Let's introduce the mod author themselves first before we get on to their work, Wolfie. Wolfie has a bunch of campaign mechanics mods, including 2 from other issues I brought up in the past, chiefly playing Norska without having to pledge oneself to a specific god, as well as shortening up the siege timer. Seriously, their workshop actually reads like a personal love letter to the things I've always wanted, and I encourage you to check out all of their stuff. Lore fanatics are going to love what they have in here. I'll have a link to their workshop down in the description, go ahead and check it on out. But as much as I love all their other mods, there is one mod in particular that needs to be looked at because it is probably the single most important mod to come out since the mod configuration menu or the Mixu or Crin Sauce unlockers back in the day. That might seem like hyperbole at first blush, but I promise you that it isn't. The Victory Conditions Overhaul 2 framework unlocks the ability to put in custom victory conditions. Okay, so pretty obvious then. But it's how it does it that matters, because unlike everything else, it does so without editing the start position. This is massive, because playing with start position is essentially like making your mod incompatible with virtually everything else, because start position edits are mutually exclusive and very, very far-reaching. To put this into layman's terms, what this means is, before the advent of this mod, if you wanted to do a completely custom faction and give them unique victory conditions, you would have had to edit the start position file to do so. But in doing so, it would have meant that Mixus or Crin Saucers unlockers were completely incompatible. So you also would have needed to add a built-in unlocker into your mod as well. And then after all that work that you just did, you would still be incompatible with virtually any single mod that was reliant on one of the 2 previous mods, which is a lot of them. As a result, pretty much everyone universally went with the easier, less destructive option, which was putting your faction in, but without any sort of campaign objective, or just by copying a standard campaign objective from one of the other races. This maintained compatibility, even if it meant that, at best, you were just essentially a clone of a vanilla race, and at worst, you were essentially just a sandbox with no endgame objective. But the new framework means that that choice no longer needs to be made. Modders can simply make the framework a dependent mod, and then do up victory conditions for their particular faction accordingly. Heck, they can even do multiple different conditions if they feel like, because the system allows for it. Imagine a Chaos Dwarf run where you have the objective to take out the dwarves who left you for dead, or an Amber Kingdom one where you have to conquer Athel Loren and convert it to Chaos Worship, or playing as Egrin Van Horseman and having to retake the Imperial College. The possibilities here are absolutely incredible to think of. And for the modders too, it also separates out the factions into unique blocks. So if something goes screwy with one faction, you can just easily quarantine them off to figure out what's gone wrong without having to screw up the rest of your factions. So for the bigger ones like Mixus or Old versus New or stuff that has a lot of different factions going on, it's giving them a lot of tools to make their lives easier as well while they're playing with these new objectives. I should mention as well, the decision for which victory conditions to allow, be that economic, military, or cultural, are not exclusive to the mod developers either. As the player, you can also tailor your game however you like. You don't like the cultural victory when playing as the Empire? Neat, turn it off. You're finding that the High Elves get the economic victory a little too easy? Turn it off for that specific run. Frustrated at how difficult it is to get a military victory with Cracker Drac? Kill it and then go back whenever you're done that run. Like, you have the ability to tailor this specifically for how you want your specific game to go. It's still a pretty new framework, being just a week old, so there's not really any modded factions that have taken advantage as of yet. However, I expect that will change in very short order. In fact, it could already be incorrect by the time this video airs. It's just at the time of the writing of this, no other mods have taken advantage yet. Even still, at the moment, there's still a reason for you to download it and leave it in your load order as we speak. For one thing, it doesn't interfere with anything as best as I can tell, and I have north of 100 active mods running right now. Secondly, it still makes the vanilla races a bit more fun to play as because it's gone through and updated their win conditions already, which for some of the factions made a colossal difference. And third, you're essentially future-proofing your load order by chucking it in now, rather than having to wait till it becomes mandatory and then figuring out why your mod list has broken. Now I should mention, it isn't completely perfect. Wind conditions that make sense with one layout might not make sense with any others. One of the ones that actually gets brought up in the frequently asked questions is the Steel Faith overhaul, but I can personally think of a few others where modifying the wind conditions in such a way might make certain victories tremendously difficult, if not outright impossible. This isn't much of a concern in my eyes because in those particular situations you would just remove that particular wind condition or just ignore it, whatever's easier for you. The second issue is that this isn't save game compatible, so it will require a fresh run to actually be used in the first place, and if you uninstall it mid-run, it will break that save game that you launched it with. For what it's worth, I consider that to be a pretty minor issue as well, because you really should never be uninstalling mods mid-run anyways. It's a practice that almost always results in broken saves, and that's not exclusive to this mod, that's a general modding advice. Lastly, and perhaps most tragically, is that the engine issues and the way that certain things are set up mean that Horde factions are almost impossible to get working with the new win conditions, so I'm specifying the cultural, military, and economic win conditions here, which means that factions relying on the Horde mechanics will also have their hands a bit more tied for the same reason. For what it's worth, this still leaves custom win conditions in for them, and the vanilla Horde factions, the Beastmen, Norska, and Warriors of Chaos, still do have modified campaign objectives with this. Again, it's not the end of the world, just be aware of the limitations of it. There's not really going to be a review of this particular thing because it's more of a tool than a mod you'll actually probably personally appreciate. But again, this is a non-debatable point. Go and at least download the framework if nothing else. However, I still personally recommend you also try the alternate win conditions. I'll have links to everything down below. I just want to reiterate the ingenuity on display here. Originally, there was 5 major roadblocks to modders for adding new stuff to the game. No new models, no new animations, no new audio, the start position modding limitations, and then modifying the campaign map itself. We've already discussed that models and animations have been completely bypassed. The biggest issue with start position has now been circumvented thanks to this particular mod, and there's even some smaller changes to the campaign maps data, such as new settlement who dis. So, we can't really modify the map itself, but at least make small alterations here and there. Really, audio and the territories of the map themselves remain the last 2 roadblocks left in place, which to me is utterly incredible concerning it was basically at the start of this year that everything remained a roadblock for modders to deal with. Anyways, that's it for this video. Like I said, it's not really much of a review, it's more of a thank you kind of deal, as well as making the community aware of what this actually means. Next week, we're going to be taking a look at the Lorelorn Forest mod, so stay tuned for that. But as always, I want to thank you all for hanging out with me, and I hope to see you all next time.